saying that you can't input.
Okay, so it's time to ask nature about food packaging. And this is how we do things, a very linear process. So we take raw material, we do production, we have rest materials because we always cut out stuff out of sheets or materials. We do transport, packaging, branding, we do consumption or use. We have waste again during the consumption, and in the end, everything is waste. And that's the very linear process that we have now. And if we then look at what is the best food packaging, it is just no packaging. Well, that's an interesting thing. Food is already packaged often. But that's, of course, also not realistic because we still need packaging for transport or for other things. But it is something you have to start with all the time. No is the best one to start with. And you will see later on also why. Because in our linear systems, we make 10% product and we make 90% approximately byproduct, which is pollution, waste, rest materials, everything else. We do a lot of byproduct, a lot of externalities, and only 10% is product. That also means, and that's where I go, there's a lot of development potential. There's a lot of space where we can do stuff. So if we then look at the area, how do I start designing a system? I always start by taking a local area. And in the regeneration, we talk about bioregions. Because sometimes it is important to look at the whole river, for instance. But it's also not easy. Like you live in kind of big city areas or big regions. I live in a small country, and my river, the River Maas, we are the end of it in Holland, but the beginning of it is France, and it goes through Belgium, and then it goes to Holland. Well, there are projects for drinkable rivers to really get all the mayors together of France and Belgium and the Netherlands to get them to have the mayors and the companies on the river. But it's hard because the laws are different and everything is different. But the area is important. It doesn't really matter, but it's the scope. And if you look at economies, there are two kinds of economies. We have now worked with economies of scale to make things really cheaper. But there's another kind of economy, and it's called economies of scope. Look it up, economies of scope, because then you combine stuff. You make a cluster economy. And it's really an economic process. It can just be done in a region. So then we have food. At this moment, it's not so important what kind of food, but what kind of food would you want to design packaging for, Diana? What kind of food did you have in mind?
I was thinking processed food because there is a lot of already waste.
Mm-hmm.
How can we include it in a scope economy or a different kind of system that is not linear, be able to not pollute as much, not have as much byproduct?
What kind of food do you have in mind, Lynn Marie? Do you think food?
When I think about food, I think about mostly just wanting to get people away from thinking globally about, just reconnecting them to where their food comes from and the people that are growing it, and just finding a way to make getting healthy food and connecting, not only connecting them to the land, but also just finding a way to get healthy food to every type of person, because, for example, we think we're helping and then we'll send all these toxic genetically modified stuff to other countries full of chemicals, and we actually end up causing more problems because they don't learn to feed themselves or grow their own food, and then we're handing them things full of chemicals. So we end up not doing anything, but and then you have these nonprofits funding those things. So it's just a question of what kind of solutions would exist to help all income brackets, and what would be job creating. So if somehow you could tie it together with your conversation about the bioregions, in terms of finding a way to,
Yeah,
kind of what I'd like
we'll
to see.
Yeah, we'll see later in the system what kind of things are happening also here in Europe, because there are really a lot of things happening here that you might be interested in. But if we look at no packaging, it helps to sometimes start with something that you think, how can that be? So take a pen and pencil. They take a pencil and a piece of paper or wherever you draw on, and start making in your scope. We always look at what do we have available, and then we look at how can you make a system with food and no packaging. Let's take 5 minutes to think about that and to draw some ideas.
Okay. Okay.
Are you okay? What did you make? Can you share it with us?
Me?
Yes, you can start.
Well, I just made notes.
Yes? Yeah, no problem. Just notes are okay.
It's mostly about in the city. I was thinking about my reality.
Yeah, of course.
And no packaging. There will have to be a lot of small urban farming facilities, like buildings. I would love to be able to create a like ecosystem out of a building, with that has bees on it and has a lot of micro. But I was also thinking about the distribution. There will have to be not a globalized like marketplace, but or my supermarket, but smaller stores like you used to be. Like you go to the bakery, and to the dairy store, and
would it be viable in Mexico City? Because a lot of the things came into existence because people want to take it easy. Yeah, life has become so hectic that people want to make it easy on themselves, and I always try to design with that reality. So would it be possible how is the culture in Mexico City for this?
I think there will need to be a shift of consciousness, because the agriculture in Mexico is one of the worst jobs ever, the lowest wages, and there is like a resistance to be a farmer. I know that in Italy, for example, there is a lot of home, I don't know, like growing, home food gardens. Even a little space, they have tomatoes and zucchini. And in Mexico, that was lost, and I think it's because of social conception and narrative about if you are a farmer, you are poor. So I imagine the way to do it would be to change the way we do farming and do it more technological. I dream about these buildings that are mix between technology and ecosystems, that can be urban, there is a lot of people that look for work, but it can be a different kind of job that they are willing to accept as an upgrade, and also make it circular, so we can use all the waste from the for example restaurants, and use it for those urban farms. And what else? I think it would need that to happen, but I don't know how we will do it with the fish. Maybe with also fish farms that are with also with plants, and dairy. I think dairy will be one of the most difficult things to do locally, and maybe grains also will be difficult. I do believe that this is my personal belief, because I live in a huge city, that agriculture, food should be urban, because it will need less transportation, and also because we could maybe use, instead of growing lettuce in huge extensions of land, we could be vertical and use those extensions of land for forestry, for sustainable forestry.
Sounds like good vision. Can imagine it. What is your take on this, Lynn Marie? No packaging.
There's I live in Massachusetts, but I go to Portland, Maine a lot, and one of the things that I really like about Maine is they have it's kind of a foodie place, and it has no politics really enter into it, because you probably have as many conservatives as you have liberals in that particular state, which is kind of interesting. So there's not the fighting that you have. Either you take care of the environment or you dig an oil well or whatever, so it's, there really aren't that. And there's a huge amount of the concept of a local, taking care of the local community is really very much the culture. So the investors are not really, I want to make as much money as possible. They're not really caught up in buzzwords as much as they are about, you know, doing their thing locally. And so what's it really interesting. So they have, they'll have like there's like a lot of local farms, but there's also a lot of local food producers, you know, like artists, crafty people that will take and make something, make their own homemade soup or something. Or, you know, one woman, for example, if you go to their local food fairs, they're really fascinating because they'll combine technology with local food, and then they'll have an entire ecosystem of money people who are really very invested in making sure that works locally. So they have big angel, very big angel groups of investors. Yeah, they have everything is there, and then they'll have the co-ops to distribute the food. They'll have the networks from the rest to the restaurants. So everything is farm to table, and then they have the networks to take the food away from the restaurants and use them for composting. And they have a distribution pathway for the local food dealers to get everywhere from, from Whole Foods to the local co-ops. They'll have
where is this, Lynn Marie?
In Maine, in Portland, Maine, pretty much the whole state, but Portland, Maine specifically because it's such a beautiful place right on the water. And
it's also where Born Global is, isn't it? Have you met Kimberly?
I think
there,
that you mentioned that before, and I don't specifically know them, but that is the kind of place a place like that would be, because what did you call them again?
Born Global. Kimberly Samaha, and it's a wonderful
really
place. It's a big tribe of Bimuri people.
That doesn't surprise me.
We do a lot in Maine. We do a lot they come from Lebanon. So there's really a lot of things going on also for the indigenous people, for the people who are the forestry people, because there's a lot of forestry, of course. And they also try to make the local energy happen with the digesters, and then really also making sure that all the cycles get in there. So it sounds like a place.
The cultures, actually the biggest problem they have is they've been so successful with their local food and their culture, and they've had people leave New York City. They've had famous restaurant people come from all over the place to go work there. So some of the people, the techies, have left Silicon Valley and have moved. Some of them have moved to Portland, Maine. So they're designing their software out of their houses. So it's become, young people find Boston boring because the culture in Boston is very dry and very snooty. So you have people who want more art or more culture are like, I'll just go to Portland, Maine, where all the fun young people are. So it's become, and it's because it's so small, and because you have Airbnb. So what's happened, that's happened probably all over the world, is become unaffordable. And it's become so expensive that it's been discovered in the sense that to go there in the summer now will cost you $10,000 a week in somebody's home that they've redone. And when they redid their homes, oh my God, their homes are gorgeous. So they'll have these beautiful architects, they're just, and the clothes, like you talked about, everything there is materials nobody would dare use in any of the local boutiques. They wouldn't dare use anything that wasn't sustainable. Like, it's very much the culture.
But then it becomes snotty as well. It becomes really...
there aren't any boutiques left anywhere in Massachusetts. If you want to go to a local boutique, I kind of have to get in my car and drive 2 hours so I can go to a place where that's still the culture. And I can stop by and have a nice little, go to a stop and have a 3 hour, 30 minutes. I'll go to the local salt spa and, rejuvenate a little bit. And they have music and art. It's just a wonderful place,
But then again, it's what you say, then they become unaffordable. And that's
I think that's
something in our money system
those are bigger issues, which there's not enough. There's not enough Portland, Maines or Maines to, if everybody did it, then people wouldn't all have to run to Maine because there's no other place left with any vitality. So part of it is there's so few places like that.
Well, I must say in Europe, there's a lot of things like this. Also in the cities, also in the rural areas, although it may seem like it's everywhere, it's not. We also still have a lot of pollution, a lot of chemical companies, a lot of problems with nitrogen, a lot of problems with PFAS, a lot of problems, well, a lot of problems. We are the end of the river, so we are like the end of the the whole EU polluting. So, but yeah, let me see what can I tell you about no packaging. There are, in a lot of cities, especially, the cities always go faster than the rural areas. It sounds maybe strange for food, but like the rural areas, they have the farmers and they say, yeah, we've done it always like this, so don't. So the city people are really more into changing. So they have like no pack supermarkets. So that's all refillable. We have the CSAs. CSAs is
What's that?
It is citizen-supported agriculture. So it is also a business model because a farmer then has a kind of a system where people have what's it called when you pay per month and you or per year and you're just a member. It's like membership. You become a member of the farmer. And then you can really harvest, because the regenerative farmers, the organic farmers always have a problem with the, harvesting is a very labor intensive thing to do. So they let the customers harvest, which is really good. And the customers have this experience. So especially around the cities, this is really a very interesting concept, where a farmer has a good business model. Sometimes he allows the people on the land, and then he has really good communication with them, what they can harvest and when, and things like that, with all kind of tags. Sometimes he also works with packages, so he brings them to distribution centers, but it's still this membership kind of model. For water packaging, of course, you have the refill bottles. But what I also see, and it is a packaging, but what is a very big gimmick now on festivals, for instance, in Europe, is membranes. So they package water in membranes. So you just have one bubble of water, which is very interesting because, of course, it is edible. It is edible packaging. Well, edible packaging is, kind of interesting anyway for food. The only thing is, do people want it? And that's always a question you always have to ask, because there was this company who came with the membranes on the water, and they say, yeah, it is kind of a gimmick, but in the long run, people don't want it. And that is always something with sustainability. People will never buy just because it's sustainable. It really still needs to solve a problem, and it still needs to be good, better even maybe than what they're used to. And that is a lot of the problems for also the social companies and the environmental companies, because they're mostly not so very strong in the marketing and sales and the business model side. So then it's hard for them to stay afloat. Of course, you have the farm to fork, so you can look at markets, bring the market closer. One thing that also the farm to restaurant, that's another one. But one thing I find very interesting is having a look at how packaging can be done in the whole supply chain. Because, for instance, if you go cooling and freezing, what we do now, then one break in the chain and everything is waste. So how do you think we can solve that? What other ways are there to preserve food? Have you ever thought about that, Lynn Marie?
I'm trying to remember Gunther's book I just read a little while ago, and he had like all those case studies. And what did he have anything for cooling and freezing? I don't remember. It was like every possible case study for this sort of thing, but I don't actually I don't know.
What about you, Diana? Are you still there? No, she's doing something else for now. Well, the thing is that sometimes you can easily make the packaging better and easier to make sustainable. When you, for instance, make a dry product instead of a moist product.
Right.
So
I
moisture
see what
is
you're
always
saying.
harder to package because you need
Right.
plastics.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a dry product, like I told you about my friend who makes cosmetics from seaweed, and it is like a facial pack,
Mm-hmm.
but she dries it, and then it's easier to package because you can use like, yeah, much more sustainable packaging. And then you make the consumer make the do the water again with it. So also there are lots of possibilities if you start thinking in the flows and not so much in, I'm going to design a packaging.
Mm-hmm. Is she selling her product now? The seaweed makeup?
I think she's on the way to. Yes, she made it that the company is called Kelpie, and yeah, I think it's always with these companies how soon can they scale or anything. She had big plans, so it depends a little on the investment, I think, and how she can do it. But it's still very, yeah, very good, and also it is the first shift in a company that really wants to be a fashion designer in kelp and seaweed clothing, which is of course very interesting because there are a lot of abundantly available materials that have fibers, and well, everything is made of fibers in our world. So why not have seaweed fibers? Why not have hemp fibers? Why not have I don't know. There's now in Holland a guy who makes underwear out of wood, local wood.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a very interesting concept again, that you have these young people who then think, okay, why not? There's of course bamboo clothing and everything, but then again, the process is a bit of a thing because you need to get the fibers out, and that is either a mechanical process or a chemical one. And that's sometimes a bit harder.
Unless you live somewhere where there's that expertise is already there in another industry, and then maybe
Yes. That's why I always say go to other industries.
Yeah, I mean,
You
there's
need
probably,
to
it
really,
depends, yeah.
if you want to innovate, you have to look across your borders. You can look across country borders and be inspired. You can look across your sector borders. You can have whole innovation teams that come from different sectors, because then it will work. And it will work much better if you have like also complementary companies work together with complementary products or complementary skills, or
Yeah, and it would be certainly be nice with some of these business models, especially in retail products, if they could also figure out a way to, if you're cross-selling different products to your local communities and have the model not be so dependent on globalization, make it easier for the whole thing to be more sustainable. If it were, you know, for example, maybe all the people in the factories could wear your hemp pants or your kelp pants or something, you know, just try to cross-fertilize the different products in the local area, because the distribution models are still challenging, I think, for
Yeah, true.
If you're looking at
True.
things only in a global way, it's still very challenging.
Yeah, the thing is a bit that I see a lot of this, of course, the smaller business models. The biggest challenge is the companies, they're not used to having different income streams.
Right.
So they
Right.
always think about this one product, this core product. And it's like we have this model of a beer brewer, and it uses grain and it uses water, and then it can there's also bakers then that bake the bread from the grain
Right.
that's used but not consumed. There's lots of oyster mushroom growing, fish farming. You can do like the biodigester, you can do all kinds of things. And then the beer brewer says, but I'm a beer brewer. I know only about beer brewing. So you
Well,
need to work together.
well, I mean, that's why I say that Maine actually helps, because that a lot of those things are in their ecosystem. But some of these things you're talking about, it's not just that. It's like the money world I come from. They don't like those kind of models, so they're always trying to talk you out of it. They're always trying to talk me out of it, because I have a model that depends on, rather than having one big product, having a few products that layer, right? And I've heard it from pretty much everybody. You're trying to do too much. I said, well, not really. It's just kind of how this product needs to evolve, because, rather than having one product that I'm selling to everybody for a massive market, it just would make sense if I could take my time and get good people in and do it slower, and then layer on other things with it. You see what I'm saying? As opposed to everybody would enjoy the products more, but that's not the way money people think. And it's actually not the way software works, and it's not the way accountants think. So it's like you're actually it's interesting if you like coming up with solutions, to come up with different software and consulting services to teach small businesses about this, because it's really it's exciting, and it would be actually a big opportunity.
In Europe there is really this huge innovation going on in Web3, and it's all about crypto, of course, which is tainted. I know it's not Bitcoin. That was the start, but now they really go big on having these systems in Web3 where you have a fully distributed system, and people don't really understand it. I will go with my blogs more into that now, because I think I've done enough in sustainability, and I think that really this should be understood, because I also worked with the European economists who say, well, when you have like a local currency or a community currency, then you can do exactly what you say, Lynn Marie, because you just have a fan base, and you don't even have to have it exactly local. It can be on theme, or it can be on area, or it can be on anything else. And then you can really create this. And
there's a really large opportunity for people to demonstrate and teach and sell products that enable what you're describing, because the regular business and money and software system doesn't really think like that. I was talking to, I think he was in Iceland, one entrepreneur, and I think he was doing exactly that. I think he was designing software for because for a more distributed model, more of a network model, because he was saying that none of the software works that way. And I know for me, for the service that I'm designing right now, I had to take software that's usually used in education, and I'm retooling it to use for what I want it for. There was no really off the shelf way for me to do what I wanted to do, and luckily, I found something that was highly customizable and more affordable, so I could tweak it like that. But so there is, if to the extent that you provide the education and the tools to make these things easier, and then you have demonstrated case studies of it where it's working here, it's working here, it's working here, and then you have this package of services that you're selling, which could be a combination of, you know, different technology capabilities as well as know-how. I think there would be large demand actually, because most people are not, what I find, even when it comes to business and money people, they really just lack imagination. And
yeah, that's the biggest lack,
once
I think.
Yeah, they're very linear and they lack imagination, and so they can't really imagine it, and so you kind of have to show them and then say, here it is, and this is how it's working, and then they'll be like, well, what do I do with it then? I said, well, you know, then the question is, then their minds will, then actually they're very helpful actually, because then they'll think you could do this, or you could do this, or you could distribute it this way. You could, you know, so once that's how I find most business and money people are. Once they understand what you're doing, once they have some examples, then they're extremely helpful, because then they'll figure out, well, we could use this financing methodology, or we could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this. And so
maybe for you, Lynn Marie, it's very interesting to go into the work of the spatial web.
The spatial web?
Yeah, it is Dan Mapes, I think. He's American. They are American. They have the Spatial Web Foundation. They now do everything with the new Web3 methodologies. They also work with edge computing, and I really think that this will be the future, because also then, of course, America still is very hesitant. He is American, and now he gets foot on the ground in Europe, because we are more diverse, and we have more, and maybe we also see more what it can do. Because if you would go on local routers, then you would even solve the problems of digital break-ins and everything, because robbing a bank would be pickpocketing, you know? We could even get our own identities back, because you can share with whomever what you want to share, for how long you want to share, and it's your decision again, because you're on a local router. And of course, the Americans don't like it, because you have the big tech companies, and they see their business models, but they know that this is coming, because Web3 is still very young. And that means that there is still going to be a lot of Web2, and a lot of people are going to hinder it and try to not tell about it. But of course, there's lots of people who do. And there's lots of hackathons now going on, and all the young people, and at some point they will just code it themselves in their phones, and they will just do it. And then we will have this peer-to-peer thing, where even banks are not necessary anymore. So it is going that way, but it will not shift immediately. But I always say I want to be in the forefront, trying to really inspire it along with the examples that I've seen in the world, so that people dare to make leaps and have the imagination and do it.
You know, the people in America are very concerned about, they just think it's normal that you solve problems by raising a lot of money and being global and scaling for impact, is what they say, and which I just find is another excuse to be making too much money and not solving problems. But so there really is this where they like to put things in buckets, like, okay, this is place-based investing. I love their acronyms. This is place-based investing, and this is this over there. And that's why you have to go, like I say, you mentioned certain places like Maine, but there's also a lot of places you could go in America where they're not so flashy, like Indiana, or you could go to places like,
well, in Europe it's the same.
You know,
it's
Detroit,
not like everybody,
you know, like outside of
this...
Detroit, you know, like whatever, these little communities by Lake Michigan or whatever, who have a lot of industrial roots. They have a lot of Europeans that came over there, and they have a lot of old industrial roots, and they would be very receptive, I think. So there's
I think at this moment we are in a shift from industrial to post-industrial, and it will be and. So that's also why I say, well, one goes slower, one goes quicker, one will be outsmarted because there's lots of new business models around, because the business models are going so fast. So also there will be a lot of outsmarting each other, and then things changing. And then when COVID came, for instance, a lot of things changed just because people were now getting used to going in Zoom and going doing maybe distance working, and then you will have, then place-based will be easier. You can also go to the countryside, you can do more, you have more choices. So also those things will change a lot, I think. Let's see, Diana, you're still there? I think she's gone for now, huh?
Well, if she isn't gone, or she would have unplugged something.
Yeah, okay. So, and she'll see the recording later on, so that's no problem.
Have you heard of an organization called Strategic Doing? Because somebody told me about them.
No.
That's into complexity science the way I am. And
no, I didn't.
And I guess he's it's more in terms of how they work. When somebody's very innovative like you are in terms of how to ask the question and how to think about solving a problem in a new way, they have a strategy for, they said doing, in other words, stop talking about it and do it. And so and he worked for probably 20 years doing this at more local community levels before he went back and got his PhD. So he's got a long track record in getting communities to change in dramatic ways, but he started out very small with what you can do.
Yeah, right? Well, that's how I started. I like you, I did permaculture. I'm normally in communities where, people do not know anything about the scientific ways of changing systems. Sometimes people don't even understand what I mean by systems, but it doesn't matter because I think everything should be explainable to everybody, and explaining an economy is, it's something that should be done, and explaining a society or rethinking the democracy or things like that, because a lot of the problems are just because our governments do not have business models and they just sell land to the highest bidder, or they squeeze out citizens. That's not a business model.
Everything is just too corrupt right now. The governments are too captive, and it doesn't matter. But you don't even really need them. Like, for example, everybody.
That's why it's so good that we have all the new thinking around.
Because
you don't need them.
You don't. You could use the Web3 to take, for example, let's say. Not the Silicon Valley people, because it wouldn't really matter. Because I like to be able to outsmart people by staying off their radar and doing something they think is small and boring, so they're not paying attention. They don't care.
What I do
and
too.
They don't realize that what you're doing is you're completely changing everything by that one example. So they'll even help you to do it because they don't think you're threatening. That's kind of what you want, and that's kind of how this guy. I haven't read his book yet, or his papers, so I don't know exactly how his process works, but I know he teaches it to people how to actually run run networked system, how to actually run these groups, and how to run multiple groups at the same time, and whether they be loose or more structured, and actually get things done. But by not like focusing on, because I think we have a lot of people now focusing on really big at a big high level 360 view, as opposed to what can we do right here? And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about things too, because I've always worked with small businesses, but I'm looking to work around the really big problems in areas and ways where people wouldn't be arguing so much. So there wouldn't be as much polarization.
I always try to get all these small and medium-sized businesses together on their complementary skills, let me put it like that. So one can use the restrooms of the one, or really trying to get more value in the system by working together. And then I also scale these projects in fractals. So if you have a good project, just transport it to another area and say, okay, and now we adapt it to that climate and to that culture. Because also cultures are very different. If you yeah, if you would say I get a high-tech machine to Africa, it would be stupid because they don't have the infrastructure to really maintain it. So you have to really look for what kind of things you bring where, and then there are still all kinds of solutions. I have this company and he makes wonderful machines and they're really kind of high tech, but he doesn't use software because he says somebody needs to be able to fix it without being dependent on me. So he used relay technology, where you can just buy a relay for, I don't know, 50 cents, and everybody with a little technical insight or a YouTube channel can just change it and fix it. Well, that's innovative thinking, I think, because then you think in completely different ways. You always adapt it to local climates and local soil conditions or local cultures, and you make it, yeah, easy.
And,
But then,
like,
course,
for example, you could get, rather than having, relying on the government to tax for, different big things, like getting everybody in the whole world to agree to a, carbon tax and all that kind of thing, you could basically find an area where you have an easier time convincing, even citizens as well as small to medium-sized businesses to have like more like, think of it as a donation from their, for no waste and, getting rid of pollution or something that would really solve problems in a bigger way, because you could be dealing with health issues then too, but you couldn't really do that at a government level because there's too much conflict and there's too many lobbyists and there's too much ignorance. But you could convince a bunch of companies in a certain area to do it, probably.
That's the thing.
If you had a sensible plan,
I always start a lot with the entrepreneurs, but then I also, at this moment, we have the ear of the government, especially the local and regional governments, the province governments.
Well, that's great.
Because what we want to do is also drag the cleaning up, which they know it needs to be done. And the EU has stricter and stricter ESG laws, which is good. It is at least forcing something. So they need the cleaning up. And then I drag that cleaning up into the production process. So what I do is, for instance, I get them to meander the river and then catch the toxic sediments in one curve, and then make sure that it is cleaned. But I also use the metals that come out of it. So you harvest instead of cleaning. And then you can get it into an economic process. That's also why I
So the funding is coming from the government level, you're saying, in this case?
Yeah, the funding at that moment is coming from a customer who wants the metals, because metals are becoming scarce.
Oh, I see. So he's willing to help fund the cleaning up of to get it?
Well, he wants to have the metals because resources are getting scarcer and scarcer, and we're all very dependent on China for that. So I think it's very, very interesting to look at that kind of models. And you can do it, for instance, with things like phytomining. And you have hyperaccumulator plants. You make them gobble up the metals and the minerals.
I know. Yeah, I know what you're.
And then you can also harvest them, and we even clean like streams with it out of cadmium, things like that, and then also have the cadmium again. So it's a really biocircularity in that way, which brings rather interesting options now that our soils are so polluted and our water. So that means everybody has all the resources locally available.
And so in that case, the customers are the people who want the metals.
Or it depends on what kind of business ecosystem
because
you have, of course.
It's interesting is because that's one of the big issues with pollution, is that how can you find a business model where there's revenues here to get the money to flow? You're having to be creative about how you can actually take something that would otherwise be a cost because there's not enough funding for that at any level. But like I was saying, that I I still think that it makes sense to have some sort of a, have employers or entrepreneurs sort of gathering together to have some sort of a commons fund, relative to some of this stuff, because it would probably spur more innovation and there would be money available that wasn't related to the government. If you could just, and then you could put that whole thing on the Web3. You wouldn't have to have all of, you wouldn't need all these bureaucracies to organize and run it, right? Once you had your rules set up. And then
that's the thing. If you make the smart contracts in the Web3, definitely there's some interesting things to do there to really to make it all. It's even I worked with this economist Bernard Littard, and he saw it just before a few years.
I know who you're talking
about.
The money guy.
He's the money professor.
I've never met him, but I remember reading his
and
stuff.
He saw it a few years before his death, and he was so excited because he says, now I can finally make money and currencies that don't have interest but have demurrage. So you pay a fee when you keep the money out of the system, when you hoard it, instead of making it active. And we all know that economies are really, they need active money. Mm-hmm. So there was really a very interesting kind of shift in one of the feedback loops. That is interesting if you think that all feedback loops are designed in some way, and you can redesign them.
And well, it's back to what the strategic doing guy was saying, is that instead of, I think what gets people tripped up is, again, they're looking at a very high level, looking down at major problems, as opposed to just teasing out one aspect of it that allows you to get some people together and to create a model that works and do something. And then you do that enough that, in uncertain and unpredictable ways, things will start to cascade. It's not always possible to see exactly how these things will evolve, but when you get enough of it going, so many creative people will come to the table at that point, right? That that's
so nice, Lynn Marie. That's really what happened. And I think this is the time, because since the 70s, all these people have been, all the old ones, the environmental ones, have been talking and doing stuff. But now with the ESG and with everything really also tightening the whole net of something has to happen, then I think this is the time where we also need the good stories and the good examples of how then, and just make it happen with a local currency, with local markets, with communities together. And in the future, the young people will code it themselves. They will really do it like that.
Well, now that's one of the good news about AI, is that it makes coding all of a sudden very easy. So you're going to have kids in grade school knowing how to create their own code. And so that actually enables a lot of citizens to design products fairly easily. And actually that's a great example of,
I really hope that will catapult a lot of things.
A more empowered way of using these, that new technology. It's a much more empowered way of using.
Okay, if we go back to the packaging, of course, packaging is needed for transport. So then it is important to think about how far is the market from your supplier market. You can go closer to each other. But I also always say to people, if you're really hungry, you can eat what is edible. So it's not wait for grain, but really, please make either your own food, things like oyster mushrooms. You can grow them on all kinds of waste streams. There's lots of coffee waste. They do it on now in Holland and in many other European countries. But there's also lots of other waste where you can grow really good proteins, or and eat what's edible. Because why wait for this lettuce that needs to be grown somewhere, when maybe you can eat young tree leaves or other stuff, weeds even. There's lots of stuff that were medicinal plants once, and we just don't eat them anymore. So also there, a lot of potential exists if you start looking at things a different way. Then the branding is very important. So also there you have to look at how it can be done, not always on the packaging, but sometimes you also see that for organic food, for instance, where they just make a little branding mark in the vegetable or in whatever. Think about opening mechanisms, a protective thing, because I am very realistic. It's not all about just being sustainable. It's also about the fact that packaging needs to be informative and very attractive. It still has a selling function. So that's also something we should realize. And if you then go further, you can really see that you have the same thing, but you are already looking at more the business models and the markets and the suppliers and how to get them closer together and who does what. The example of the customers harvesting, why not? There's one big, horrible metric in food, and that's the kilo. Why do we produce kilos? And why do we produce uniform food just because it's packaged easier or transported easier? That's silly. We should have small foods that have lots of nutrients because they're very dense with nutrients of very irregular forms. And then we should arrange that they can be easily harvested, for instance, by swarm drones. They will do that in the future. So you can have food forests with 200 species or something, which is great. And then the harvesting is a very intensive labor thing. So either you let it do by the customers, or you use technology, which is swarm drones, for instance. Why not? And in cities, of course, also for Diana, in Mexico City, look at what you have. You have walls, then you can have plant walls. You maybe have discarded areas, then you can make tiny forests. In Asia, there are really big movements of the tiny forests with the Miyawaki method. And they do very dense planting, so it grows very fast. And then you use it all because you have 7 layers. You have roots you can eat, you have trees, you have bushes, you have, well, the whole permaculture method, all perennial plants. So it's very good for the soil. And yeah, you can do a lot of things. You can use roofs to do stuff. You can do vertical farming. There's, of course, a lot of things in vitro. So that is just on water farming. And I think we should use it all. I'm really an and person, where I think we should not leave something, unused. If you think it's a good idea, just see what it does in a certain culture, because some cultures are more high-tech than others. That's
nice. It seems like also just there'd be interesting ways to get rid of if you could use blockchain in creative ways and let the governments work out the financial aspect of that, which is what they're going to harp about the most. But if you can use the smart contracts in creative ways, which there's less regulatory pushback on that stuff, it's a question of resource sharing and efficiencies. Just finding ways where we used to spend a lot of money unnecessarily and waste a lot of money. We waste we waste so much money, we waste so many resources that when you start rethinking how you're organizing people and how you're getting things done, you're all of a sudden you're not only creating more work for people, but you're also not wasting resources. So you don't actually need as much money to get projects done as you once would have, depending on how you're marketing it and selling it and what you're actually doing. Because the practical side of not having so much waste is that you're not using as many resources, but you're also, you know, with the earth, but you're also not wasting money either. So you're able to.
Well, in your line of work, Lynn Marie, it might also be very interesting to look at the new business models with the carbon credits, because ESG is giving us a lot of opportunities. Of course, like in Europe, we now have stricter laws. They really have to report about ESG, so they need a broader dashboard. And in 2024, the big companies will have to report on ESG and what they're doing in their strategies. And in 2026, it is for all companies, so also the SMEs. So that gives us a very interesting thing, because then if you really think about what at this moment is happening with the carbon credits, it's really interesting, because there are, like in Berlin, really good companies like Clear CO2, and they make the methodologies for smaller SMEs to get.
What company did you just say?
Clear CO2. And there's another one, which is the Value Instrument. I think it's valueinstrument.org or something. And they do things like they make a methodology, for instance, for soil, how much carbon it will hold. It all has to do with the organic matter, so not so much the KPN as it does in the chemical fertilizers, but it really works on the organic matter. And then they have a huge group of German biodynamic farmers together, and they make the methodology to really see how the carbon is held in the soil. And then they make sure that all the smaller companies together do one, of course, they need to be registered, so the methodology needs to be checked. But once that's done and they can finance that as the whole group, then all the farmers can tap into this money of the carbon credits, because carbon credits are at this moment, of course, a very big stream of money. And I really like it that it's going to the smaller SMEs. In England at this moment, in the UK, they are working on a methodology for carbon credits for the food waste and the food banks for poor people. So they are really looking with LCAs and everything to how much they are saving in this whole carbon thing. And then this whole methodology in one big sector is checked. And if the methodology is found okay by the ISO people and the NEN people, then all these food banks can tap into this stream of carbon credits, because they can sell it. It can be on the carbon credit market. And at this moment, the big business models are starting to emerge there, which are very interesting.
I don't understand how would the food banks sell carbon credits from what exactly?
Well, the thing is, they save a lot of food waste. So you can see
it's
how
to do
much
with the food waste you're talking about.
Well, of course, carbon is not only in soil. It's not only when you capture it. Of course, we do these models as well for the seaweeds, because it is seaweed holds like 20 times more carbon than on land. So that's a really interesting model as well. But that is still pure nature-based solutions. But you can also find a methodology, if you really look at the LCA of everything. You can see how the packaging, how the food itself.
I'm sorry, but when you're saying LCA, what are you talking about? What am I?
The life cycle analysis.
Oh.
And the life cycle analysis is what is used in Europe a lot to really see how well it is doing in sustainability, a certain product. So life cycle analysis all have to do with the whole chain. So the one I show here it is the raw material, but it's also the energy. What kind of energy do you use? And you have different, if you use like coal mines, it has a different value than, for instance, the windmills or something else, or it really works on it is the whole ESG thing. I must say, I'm sometimes really fed up because it's a big black hole that they're sucking us in.
I wish I wish I was as optimistic as you are, but that's one of those areas where I think it's just a lot of packaging, window dressing and packaging going on.
I know, but that's why I do like these people.
Well, it sounds like,
who are really using Web3 to tap into the system that is made for big companies.
Yeah.
And that is trying to get that income streams to these small companies.
Yeah, I know.
And that's what I like.
Yeah, I like that too, but you do have to be a little bit careful of making sure you're putting your system maps together in a way where you see the dependencies that are being created with the small players and who are the intermediaries that are really benefiting. Like if you're creating a situation where the small farmers are making a little bit, but there's intermediaries really getting massively wealthy off of it. Yeah. And then the question is, are you really doing anything to help nature? Are you really helping? You know what I'm saying? It's a question of, you have to look at the flows, like you say, the flow maps, and see how the dollars are flowing. And then the question is, if you took a step back and you looked at the issues, interconnected issues like health and well-being in general, humans in the environment, what solutions are resulting from this? And so one of the things, and it's more questions than answers at this point, because there are some clever people working on broader concepts than just carbon by looking at, like, let's say natural capital units.
We do that too. Yeah. We start.
And I have no idea where that's going. I know they're talking about looking at, what is it? The satellite data. So you can, so in other words, you can look at an ecosystem in its entirety rather than just one element, because, I don't know if you ever read Charles Eisenstein's book on, I think it's called Climate. He's got such a clever way of looking at this, he actually has true.
But
he has a background in math.
What I'm saying, and I want to give you some hope, because in Europe, this is really happening. If you look at they are not intermediaries, I must say. They are not really big consultants, because they are working on the Web3. So they are working on the peer-to-peer things and in the fully distributed systems. So that's what I find very interesting, because it's not the big firms that are doing this, but this is really the hackers. This is really the ones that do it.
And then once you develop these systems,
and also trying to then also give the education of the whole system and how it doesn't work, but how you can, at this moment in time, try to get at least a strand. Because if you don't get funding for these small things, then they will just disappear and we will have nothing anymore. So that's also why I find it very interesting. And what you also see is, definitely the satellites. We now work on a project with Belgian and Greek people on the sea. And it is about satellite data. But then you also must understand that at this moment, for instance, the satellite data of the sea is still very fragmented. So there are 7 systems, and they still have to be, like they call it, semantic mediation. So the languages really need to be, it's all big Babel Tower. But in the end, what they're doing now is try to get the satellite data, and then sensors are, of course, dumb. So we get people in the seas, like the divers and the boats and the people who know, the fishermen and everything. They feed it back to the system. So you get AI systems that are really learning from the real situation. We look at degraded systems, and we're going to make them better again. And then also making sure that we can harvest, for instance, if you make a cradle of kelp or of other seaweeds, you will really host a lot of sea life, but you can also harvest it. And also that can be financed with some carbon credits, because the sea is really a big carbon sink, of course. So also here you see we're looking at ways, and I'm not saying it's all there yet. It's all really hidden in plain sight that this is happening, a bit in the underflow. But I really like it, and it gives me hope. And I also hope that a lot of people buy these stories, try to invent it with us, because a lot of it has to be developed still.
Well, you know, it sounds like if you're able to leverage the current flows of capital in ways where you can get infrastructure built that'll allow you to do more than one type of thing in the future. Because if you could, for example, if you're building these peer-to-peer networks and you're building, you're able to leverage financing that's available to be able to build these things that you wouldn't be able to build otherwise. But as you get going, you would be able to use these networks for other things, so that what you don't want to do is be boxed into one financing methodology that may or may not give you what you're hoping for.
Of course,
what you want to
don't
be able
want
to
that.
do is,
No.
it's like
You
for
want to
any
be
financial,
flexible.
it's
yeah.
like saying, look, if the government wants to give me a grant, I'm happy to take it, kind of thing. You know, it's like that.
Yeah.
What you want to do is make sure that your system is flexible enough that
Yeah.
that you're going, great, I can finally build that
Yeah.
that network and that system I want to build, and I can leverage it for so many different things potentially.
Yeah.
And if the system, because you want to make sure that where we truly are using natural intelligence is that we don't get boxed into something that is in fact not natural anymore, you know, just
No,
because
that's
of the
true.
money that's available. And that's, you know, I have, don't see as many projects as you do because I'm not up and running, but I've been wondering about, has anybody been creative about any financing, you know, revenue sources or unique business models to in some of these environmental areas that are not carbon based? Have you seen anything that's interesting and innovative relative to business models that gets capital flowing? Well, you know,
Yeah.
have you
Well,
seen
the
things like
thing
that?
as what I say, things like we do it a lot with the there is in Rotterdam, there is a very interesting project that started out in 2013. They started out with just two guys with oyster mushrooms on coffee waste in the city.
Yeah.
And then they got an impact investor, an angel investor, and he bought an old swimming pool. We always work with stranded assets. So we look at everything that's available in a scope. And then we look at what is stranded, and it can be a talent, it can be a building, it can be anything. So look at what you have and use it. We always
that's a whole area of that's really a strong skill that you have, and a know-how relative to looking at things in this contextual way. You know, that's not the way business and finance works today in general. And then, so the way my mind works, because that's the world I come from, is I take some of the things you say and I'm thinking about, how could I reapply this? How could I, you know, use what she's telling me to find a system or a way of talking about this or a way of doing this that we could sort of provide some scale to the know-how that you have and to the relationships and tools that you have, because not so much in a top-down way, you know, but in a practical, down-to-earth way of how could this know-how be applied to more projects, and how could we funnel more projects through that way? You know what I'm saying? And that would open up many more resources. You see what I'm trying to say? Then there would be many more.
I understand what you're saying. I must say we are, of course, very much dealing in the world of the regeneration. The regeneration is not always happy with me because I'm really a very practical business girl. So I also say I need to do this in harbors, in industrial estates, I need to explain this to CEOs. I need to be in this professional world as well. Of course, a lot of the people in the regeneration are also very much about the citizens, which is very good. It needs to be done. But like the eco villages and everything, it always ends up in, I don't know, I've seen too many of them not succeed because, again, of scarcity feelings of some of the members. Because
I know.
of all kind of social things. It's not easy.
I know, and there's
for
a
people
lot
to
of
work
hostility.
together.
There's a lot of hostility in those,
Yeah.
a lot of these communities towards
Yeah.
anything technology or anything
Yeah.
Wall Streety.
Yeah.
And I think it's
And
just, you know, I understand that, but ironically, and this may be hard to understand, but remember, I come from the regular investment space, but healthcare.
Yeah.
I probably have more hostility for the fake save the worlder, you know, the bullshit and the green space than I do about regular money people. And you know, the question is, why would I feel that way? Aside from the fact that I came from this world, is most of the people have wonderful families. They give a lot of money away to charity. They're not monsters, right? Like they're not as naive. They don't get fooled as much. They tend to be very street smart. So, and you know, it's part of my goal is to try to tap into regular Wall Street more than the impact investors, because I think that I can have more down to earth discussions with them. But in order to do that, you know, what I'm working on now is an interim solution to my three nested products. One is more educational and trends based. It's more explaining in practical ways how all this stuff works and why it makes sense, and try to come up with ways of explaining it that it will expand the perceptions of the investors to understand, oh, I see why she's saying that. But I also need to do it because the way I think about it is so different than most impact investors, that most of the regular investors are so turned off by all that stuff that I have to make sure I'm explaining things in a way that they can relate to. So they're not like, oh, brother, she's another one of those people. And so so I'm trying to be very, very creative about it. I use mythology. I use whatever I have to use to make the story make sense to these people. And so what I've done recently, I have no idea whether this is going to take off, because originally I had three products. I had a direct investing product, which was really less a fund and more of like a blending of business development and money together in one product. And so and it's more of an ecosystem approach towards building and financing something, which inherently has flexibility built right into it. So say, for example, the Web3 is not really built out that much, but in this kind of model that I had really used nature to design, is that I can actually put whatever develops into this model, because it's a flexible model by definition. So I'm not really married to one process or one way of running money. And so, but it's been very hard for me to meet the right people because of this polarization that's going on. And America is a very different place than Europe. They're not as educated about a lot of these things. And the hostility is very high over here. There's almost World War III right now going on politically. It's really, really dramatic, and it's really lousy. But I still feel like, I really feel very strongly that real natural system intelligence is a way to bridge that gap. It's a way to bring people together again. And so I had the public investing was less the large cap stuff, and for me, more the smaller and mid-sized companies in the public world, because even though that's not scalable the way money people think about it, you know how you talked about scaling for scope as opposed to scaling for, you know, in the economies of scale. The small companies are like the forgotten children on Wall Street. Most of the private companies that raise money don't make a lot of money or don't make any money, and they get dumped onto the public markets at fire sale prices, and then they become shrunken little disastrous little messes. And that's, believe it or not, that's my specialty. I'm a run in there and dig around the rubble and look for the diamonds in the rough kind of a person. And I'm always looking to troubleshoot, and I'm always looking to empower these CEOs, because they're usually capital constrained. They usually don't have as many resources and whatever else. And nobody wants to talk to them because the liquidity is so low. And it's even harder now because most of the trading on Wall Street is electronic through algorithms. And so that's highly predatory in a way that I've never seen before. So there's all of these reasons why you would never want to do this, except we kind of have to do this because we need to be able to have a system that works for small companies. You can't have, you know, Wall Street worked a lot better when companies came public earlier and the funds didn't have, the venture capital funds owned still maybe 20% of a company when they came public, and then they'd move on to the next investment and move on to the next investment. Because venture capitalists, especially early stage ones, they're very good, they're very intuitive, but they're not really overly analytical. And so what's happening now, because they're raising larger funds and they're syndicating in bubbles and herds, like climate change, whatever, and they're putting massive amounts of money to work, doing very little due diligence, because VCs don't really do a lot of due diligence, not like a private equity fund would do. Like a private equity fund, for example, is the kind of fund that comes in there and will buy a big division of a company and then turn it around operationally. That's a whole different thing, right? Then there you have operators and you have, you know, you have people who know what they're doing. So it's a whole different way of investing. But the VCs, it's more conceptual and it's not as detailed. And so you have them raising larger amounts of money. You have them doing it in like digital investing, and then they invest tons and tons and tons of money. And this is what's going on, which is one of the reasons I don't like the carbon reductionism, because if you actually look at the flows of capital, they're mostly going towards these large projects where investors can put a lot of money to work. They're not really doing a lot of due diligence. There's some flashy guy at MIT that everybody knows. And so they're not doing those projects that warms your heart, the ones that you told me about. They're not funding those projects. They're funding the big, massive projects that are going to make Dow Chemical more money. You see what I'm saying? Or they're going to make
I
Monsanto
know.
more money. They're not.
It works like that, but maybe
they're not doing what you
maybe
described.
I can introduce you to some of my friends. Let me have a think about it, and maybe also talk to them about it, and see if I have some friends who might be interested also to know more about the whole financing world, and then and they know a lot about Web3 things. So maybe let me see if I can introduce you to some people.
Well, I'll show you the different, one of the things I'm working on, because it's kind of a new idea. So I haven't launched it yet, but I'm still tweaking it. But so what I did was originally the investment, it was going to be part of the investment, the private and public people would just get it for free as the educational and trends. They would get it for free if they got the investment product. But I'm trying to see if I can carve it out now and make it a separate project, and then I can invite more people rather than just investors. And I want to be able to talk about the kinds of projects that you're talking about, because most of the people I know have never even heard of most of the stuff you talk about.
But I have a lot of people around me who do know about it. And so that might be interesting for you to see that, that you can get together on this and then also get the financing straight. I must say, on purpose, we have a very small company. I do projects. I always am in different projects with colleagues, and they also have their own. And mostly it's a broader project, and then I'm part of it. Let me put it like
I understand.
that. So and I definitely don't want to be in a big company. I also don't want to be too much into the investment world, because I just
you don't really need for what you're telling me about what you're doing. Like it's
I don't need investment. No. I just need some cash flows. So.
Yeah, I understand. I know exactly what you're saying, because in many ways, that's why I want to.
But a lot of other companies do, and I do want them to be, and I also don't want them to jump from subsidy to another subsidy, because that's another thing. I see a lot of companies, there's lots of EU money going around, and then they say, oh, I want EU money. And then they jump from one subsidy to another subsidy, which is also not... It's not a business model.
No, it's unfortunately, that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of impact investors are extremely naive, because they haven't had enough history in investing to understand how the cycles work. But I'm I'm in my late 50s at this point, and I've been around and I've seen quite a few cycles, and I've seen a lot of things blow up, and I've seen, you know, things come and go out of fashion. And I typically avoid, this is what's so funny about these comments, because I typically avoid, in the past, I have avoided investing in any area where it was dependent on government subsidies, because I long-term never make money in those things. Now that's all you see in, whether it's, you know, the carbon thing, or whether it's a very foreign thing from my way of looking at things, because I've never seen any of those projects work long term.
No,
so I tend to stay away from them. And so I tend to, I'm always looking, but you have a very creative mind, and it sounds like so your colleagues. I'm always looking for creative ways of reorganizing things so we limit the amount of that stuff that's actually necessary, to disintermediate it somehow that's practical, in a way where it's you know, because that's where it's more efficient. You end up with a project that you know is going to work, and there's less waste. And believe it or not, money people really like that. So, and so there's just, and it's understandable why there is a little bit of a fight going on right now, because I wrote about that in one of my recent blogs. There's just not a lot of real due diligence going on, because there's not a lot of people in the impact space who even know what that means, you know, because it's an entire cycle of investing. We've literally been through at least 15 years of funny money. Think about that for a second, because you have a business, you have a financial economist, right? You have we've had funny money for, I mean, look how young these people are. Half their life has been funny money, right? So what that basically means is you have no idea what to do now that the party has stopped. You have no idea what that means. There's an entire generation of business people, entrepreneurs, and financial people who have absolutely no idea what it now means to no longer have funny money. And so, and actually, it's
let me see if I can hook you up with some of my friends and see what emerges, Lynn Marie. I really find your ideas very fascinating, and I think we should be very realistic about the real markets and the real economy like it is now, but also be very creative, and especially for the smaller companies that need to do it. Let me finish up the packaging for the moment.
Okay.
And then I'll and then I'll,
will I be able to see the slides, or
you'll later get the slides.
Okay.
So I did do some links here about some packaging and some more radical things. Here's also a lot of links. There's really interesting things going on in the packaging world. There's lots of mycelium going on, many companies. There is lots of hemp going on, which is not the marijuana, but it's the industrial hemp.
Yeah, I know.
The fibers. There's also seaweed packaging. There is PHA, which is microbial plastics, because of course we want microbial plastics. We want things to be strong during lifespan, and we want things to be biodegradable afterwards. So that works with the microbes. There's also this Novamont company in Italy. They make plastics out of thistles. So and also very biodegradable. It's used a lot. They already have like 5 factories in Italy, so it's also not small anymore. So there's really a lot of things have already happened in this field. If you see what the bottom line is, and I think this is something what Diana really was also looking for, in the sourcing, we always go to abundantly available materials. That means in the scope, it's either abundantly growing, so you can often harvest, and it's quickly growing, but it can also be that it is a rest stream, which is different than a waste stream.
What is the first? A what stream?
Well, a rest stream, like a rest material stream. Because in the production process, you often have rest streams, and we want to catch them before they become waste, because as soon as they become waste, they lose the value in the system, in the economic system. And often you cannot do anything with waste. It's even when you have FSC wood, which is the best wood ever, But if you cut it in two and you put it in the bin, then it's not shortened wood anymore. It's just waste wood. And waste wood has no value, and you are not allowed often, especially in our European laws, you're not allowed to use it for lots of things. Waste is really something that is, yeah, there are so many laws on waste that it's not easy to reprocess it.
In other words, even if you wanted to do something with it, it's hard because of all the laws that are in the books.
Yeah, that's the thing. Then in the production, you will always look at products that are strong during lifespan. It does sometimes mean that you have to design the materials together with the product, because you have to know how long is the lifespan and what do you use it for, in what kind of environment as well. That's also environmentalism. Look at it from, okay, you have a product and you use it in a certain environment. And then when it becomes waste, it goes to another environment. And then you can easily design the material to go biodegradable as soon as it comes in the other environment. So those things can be designed. And then in the waste cycle, you go to biodegradable or used in another process before it becomes waste. How can you have a growing economy in this, a healthy growing economy? Well, I think, Lynn Marie, you know that in a complex system, 1 and 1 is more than 2. You have emergence. So, yeah, in some ways, some unexplainable ways, it's always more than that, especially if you can tie the things together and you use the space in the system. And because we only make 10% product and the rest is byproduct, there is a lot of space in the system. And also, when you look at living systems, the way that nature does a lot of processes are not how we do it. So about 80% of the strategies of nature are not used in human processes. So also there is a lot of space in the system to innovate. And that's also why I always go in the tech space, because it's hard tech. It's sometimes really about making products, making new solutions. And it's also about the software tech, because it's all about the information. And information is really, it's gold dust in a business model and a system. And it's also very important that the information goes right, and that you also then can finance, for instance, with cash flows instead of ROIs, which are way longer in our system, but that's maybe a bit too technical for now to see how it's really done. If you look at synergy and synthesis, that's where you get the growth in the system from. So if you have a regional scope and you are really, really using each other's rest streams in the scope, you can have an industrial estate that is just self-sufficient and has really a lot of growth and a lot of products. The synthesis is a lot about diversity and complementary processes, because you can imagine we now have a lot of industrial estates that are all the same. But if you emit CO2, again, the CO2, then you can have a greenhouse next to it that uses it in a closed system to produce spirulina or to produce food or to produce something else. You can have, it's like Blue City again. Blue City has 200 companies in one big building. And the beer brewer is emitting things and the spirulina grower is using it. But there's also things like vegan leather going on. There's lots of, so it's all these things are going on, and they're all designed to use each other's things that they don't need anymore. And that's again a stranded asset in the system, because it is valuable and it's not used as value in the economic system.
Is that what you described, that beer garden? Is that in Amsterdam, or is that in the Netherlands, or where?
It's in Rotterdam, yeah.
Rotterdam.
Yeah, Blue City is in Rotterdam, yeah. It is in Amsterdam. We also have a lot of projects. It's more about clean tech and about cleaning soil with plants and myceliums and things like that. There's also lots of systemic design going on in Metabolic Lab, it's called. It's also, a long time already. Then in Europe, Berlin is really a very big point of where a lot of things are happening, also in the tech space and the Web3 space.
So there's a lot of collaboration already in these areas where people are able to find the expertise to be able to leverage these different.
Yes, the thing is, how do they know it? And the thing is also, like in the regeneration, there's lots of talking going on. They think we need to talk a lot together and find it out together. I always say just put two people together who need each other and then get on with it. It's easier.
Like the strategic doing people, because that's exactly what he
yeah.
says. They're building they're going to be building some center over there in
and
Belgium,
then
I think. So
a lot of the people who do the projects that we do, it's like social projects, it's environmental projects, and Lynn Marie, they have no idea about business models. They are really crappy at marketing. And they think marketing is not good. And I always say to them, you still should sell your product. So you can do things like regional branding, and they don't understand how it can work. But if you have like farmers, they cannot brand because it is a bulk product. It's perceived as a bulk product. So if they brand together as a regional branding, and you really have,
they could also leverage the cost that way. They could share.
Yes, definitely.
That
and
would
they
actually
can
make a lot
also,
more sense, actually. And
they can
that's
also
really
work
interesting
up
because
they can also go up in the supply chain and then make like a farmer that makes a product out of it. The higher you get in the supply chain, the more added value that you have and the more possibilities for branding. So we have an organic farmer, for instance, and he makes all kinds of cheeses for restaurants in Holland, and he brands them wonderfully. It's called Bird Chatter. It really has a nice name and nice logos, and it's really wonderful organic products. And because he goes up in the supply chain, he can brand easier, and he can build his business models on more than just farming.
Well, that's
but
the
it
answer.
is a bit
That's
of a
what I had said earlier.
It is a bit of a difficulty with the farmers because they say, I'm a farmer and not a product maker. So then they have to work together. Or what you see is,
do they like to work together? Because one farmer told me he goes down. He says trying to get us to work together is like herding cats. That's what one farmer.
Yeah. It depends on the culture again. I must say, in Spain, for instance, they have this really cooperative culture. There's lots big corporations like Mondragon and everything, and they're really examples for the whole country. But where I am now in Greece, it's really more difficult because people, they don't trust each other. They don't want to work together. They don't want to sell their secrets. They think that their ideas are really gold, and then they don't want to talk about it. And I say only when it's developed, it's gold. Before that, it's not. So
I'm sorry, I'm back.
Yes,
I had to take a call.
Diana. No problem. You can see the recording, so that's really good. We talked a lot about financing and about other stuff. I'm now again trying to explain a little bit also about how systems work, because if you have, for instance, a lot of different connections, it's way more resilient. So this can be used in many ways. It's not only for a system like an economy or a society, but it's also, for instance, for an earthquake-resistant building, because you need many beams, and if one goes, then the other don't go. So that's how they make earthquake-resistant buildings, with not that stiff materials and then also lots of beams. So things like that are important. I go very quickly now because we're out of time. But you can see the slides later. This is the biomimicry methodology. It always works first with ethos. Ethical, it should be ethical. We should work with reconnect because we need to reconnect to nature to understand it. it really works. I always like to do my lectures, my physical lectures outdoors, because then the trees help me explain. I don't know how it works, but it works. And then we translate the strategies, the principles of nature to the what. So that's the function and the principles, always to the system, the whole system, the processes. So that's the flows in the system. And then also the forms. And you mostly see the forms where they really look, they make it's sometimes also very technical, but how they make a train, a bullet train, like the beak of a bird, how to penetrate the water or the air or the sound barrier, things like that. So that's also biomimicry. And then we go biology to design. So you really mimic biology, or you challenge biology and you still make it very healthy, because of course we always make things healthy and non-toxic, and green chemistry, green engineering. So here I have a few things for you, Diana. You just came in right time, because this is also how they sometimes make it visible. This is work from my Italian friend Chiara Battistoni. The Politecnico Torino has a long, a whole education system around systems design. They really look at demography. What are we making the system for? Who are we making the system for? They look at cultures, they quantify it, they qualify it. And then they also make the streams. So they do it like this with feedback loops and how it all works. Here you see also a bit of her work where it works with feedbacks. Visualizing is very important in there, Diana. So it's always important to have the infographics, in one picture at least see something that happens. That's also what we try to do, for instance, with this kind of things. Really make it very visible. Well, the first picture you saw was from Kotler and Sakar. You liked it a lot. But then again, it's maybe you start with one, maybe in the middle, which is an important one, in this case, poverty. Then you really look at the others. What I do if I want to solve this, because this is all the problems and I always like solutions, so I just flip them around. I say inherited wealth, then we make a law and we say, okay, nothing is inherited anymore. What would happen? And of course, there is a full spectrum. You don't have to do it all. But nowadays, everybody is thinking just about income tax and material tax. But you can also look at inheritance tax, and you can even look at many more ways to make the business models go. So, but flip them around and then see what happens. If you made drones for war, flip it round and use the technology for harvesting or for other things. It's really, it will be done, but it's also good to see what happens if we flip them around. Here you see on the right side, you see it a bit differently done. This is about NFTs, which are the non-fungible tokens. Also on the current digital ways of cryptocurrencies and how it all works with owner structures. NFTs are really about owning structures. So you own something, you own a coding line instead of something physical. So at this moment, you see that all the models go to a combination of biological, physical, and virtual. And then we redesign our whole economies and societies and democracy models and everything with that. Well, here you see a work about NFTs, because everybody thinks it's just an art form that you sell online. Well, there are many more use cases for it. So real estate is being redesigned with it, and it's all early stages. So I don't know where it will all go, but this also, Diana, gives you an idea on how you can make a complex thing visible. Here you see lots of the things are circular, of course. This is work from my friend, Ayumi Matsuzaka in Berlin. She has this wonderful business model where she takes baby poop in biodegradable diapers and she collects it. She makes terra preta of it, which is the soil as in the Amazon, which is man-made soil. And there's lots of technical universities doing it. Biochar and terra preta are really changing the world because terra preta is regenerating itself all the time because of the high content of microbes. So then she does the vermicomposting, the terra preta. She plants fruit trees on it in the parks in Berlin. And then, of course, you have healthy food again for the babies. And she's planning to have communities of 100 parents there. And you can imagine if you have communities like that on babies, it's not only parents, it will be grandparents, and it will be all kinds of diverse communities. You can have cryptocurrencies there, you can have community currencies, you can do all kinds of innovations with, I don't know, children's toys, whatever. You can do clothes swapping, you can do all kinds of things in these communities. Well, this is another interesting one in the social field, because a lot of people are talking a lot about power and privilege. And mostly it is talked about in the Black scenes as well, in the diversity scenes. But of course, there's much more about power and privilege. Because, for instance, I'm perceived as a white woman. Inside, I have Indonesian ancestors, but nobody sees it. But then also, I have a good education. I didn't do university. I started working at 21, but I did a lot of things afterwards. And yes, I have a good education. So also there, I have a privilege over people who don't have that, or who are dyslexic, or who are other abled, or other have other neuro brains, or there's so many diversity going on. And we have a system in which some things are normal and all the other things drop out of the system. And it's always a very good discussion thing, this one, the academic wheel of privilege, because people realize they have some privileges, and they also realize that where they have power, they should use that power to get other people the podium, because that is then wanted. Like I'm a bit of an older voice, so I always want to give the podium to young people, because they should be that way. And so you can always really work with that. But this is a very good way to make it, to visualize it. And then this is our new project, the Blue Hearts Network. It's still a very early stage project. We are working with seaweed and satellites, and we try to get it all together, the tech and the seas, the ocean restoration, and then also with things like fashion shows, and really making it very inspirational for lots of people. So we'll see how that goes on. And well, we're working on it.
Yeah,
That's it for now.
I'm very looking forward to hear the video, to listening to the recording. And I just had a call from a possible brand that I wanted to include, but I found that people are very resilient to change, and to it's gonna be very hard to what I'm trying to do is gonna be so difficult. But
well, maybe it's good because you're now together in this call. It would be really good to have a call, just the two of you, and see where you how to try to convince people. Of course, I found kind of ways in Holland, but then it has been a lot of struggle as well. We get the ear out now somewhere. We get a bit of interest from some papers, and I really try to dance with all of that, with governments, with the companies, with everything there. But in every culture and every country, it is different, and also the narratives should be different. I just don't want them, I'm like Lynn Marie, I don't want them to get too fluffy just in the social thing, because yes, we need it social. It should be social by design. It should be environmentally friendly by design. And then we should just get on with making products that sell well because there's a need for it. People want it. It's beautiful. So that is also very important. We need to make it realistic.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you how it goes. I'm just beginning. This is like the very earliest stages. And I've been doing all the design of the project, the marketplace and everything. And now I'm starting to approach people, and I'm finding
well, keep us informed, and also reach out on LinkedIn. I'm always available, or an email or whatever. I'll always try to answer you. So just keep us informed how things are going, because with these groups, I also want to give people a bit of a tribe to, reach out to other people as well, to see that we can make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to give up.
Yeah.
No.
Well, lots of success, and we'll meet each other again. So
Thank you.
A
yes.
real pleasure to talk to
A
both of
pleasure.
you.
Okay.
You'll send the link of the video, right?
Yes, I will send you the link. I will now stop sharing it. And then let me see where I do this.
Thank you.
Sharing, and then I'll
You.
stop recording.